From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Today, a federal pardon of Michigan's so-called fake electors.
And the latest legal filings in the lawsuit against the state's new 24% wholesale marijuana tax.
An update on the judicial side of things in Michigan this week. But first, for the past 72 hours, I feel like the question among pretty much every Democrat and even some Republicans is what is happening in Washington, D.C., and why? Why did 8 senators who caucus with Democrats align with Republicans to reopen the government? Let's turn to retired Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee for some answers. What happened? What really happened here?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's a story that we've seen unfold before, where Democrats in the Senate in particular haven't been able to hold the line, and were willing to hold the line only to a point and buckled. And, obviously I'm disappointed in that, because the fact of the matter is this was a fight over whether or not the federal government is going to continue to provide support to people who need health care and can't afford it without the additional help. That's good for our country. We should have held the line. I think the position that Hakeem Jeffries has taken is the correct one. And ultimately, especially at this point of maximum leverage, require a negotiation and not take, I think, the folly of a promise that there'll be a vote at some later point in time. I can't, in the 12 years I was in the House, I learned the value of those promises. It's exactly zero.
So then why did it happen?
Well, I think sometimes people just cave. And I think it's unfortunate, because often for people in Washington, and I can say this with some experience, it feels like a Washington game. It feels like it's Democrats and Republicans, the House and the Senate, in some sort of a chess match over the exercise of their authority. When you get out here in the real world, and that's not what it's about at all. In this case, could have, should have, and always was about health care for Americans. And I think some in Washington get so focused on the Washington struggle that they forget the purpose of the struggle in the first place.
I mean, what you just said, it harkens back to a conversation I had once with a Democratic state lawmaker who said to me about a different standoff. I asked him how he thought this would play out, and he said, "We'll cave, we always cave." Is that true? And if so, why?
Well, it's certainly been some of our recent experience in the Senate. I can't explain the psychology of the Senate. I spent 12 years trying to do that, and I was able to figure out House Republicans more than I could figure out the entire institution of the Senate. But they have their own rules, and they have their own sort of folkways. And they also have only a third of their members who are facing re-election in any given cycle, and it changes the dynamic over there in ways that are obviously quite frustrating to some of us. But at the end of it all, it really comes down to whether the position that one takes on principle at the point in time, say the beginning of the shutdown occurred, if that principle is not a strong enough principle to stick to even when there's some pressure and pain, then maybe it wasn't a strong enough principle in the first place. I regret that, because I think it should have been. And I actually do think that the moment was occurring sooner rather than later, that the president would have to sit down with Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and say, okay, we're all going to have to negotiate on this. I mean, he claims to be the best deal maker in the world. You got to sit down with people you disagree with and make a deal. And after those elections a week ago, I thought the country was clearly in a position where they were sending a message that they don't trust Republican leadership and we need to see a change. I thought that change was coming, and I think the fact that a handful of Democrats in the Senate weren't able to hold the line, I think is a mistake. And it sends, first of all, it has an impact. Americans are going to lose their health care. But it also reinforces a message that some have heard, and that is that Democrats don't have the will to stick with it and fight until we actually see the result we're looking for.
And of course, I think part of the frustration that you hear from Democrats is the fact that the party had these big wins just last week in Virginia, in New Jersey, and New York City, and then to come right after a successful election night into this deal very much was whiplash.
It was. And again, you can tell from my position here that I'm frustrated with it. I will admit, maybe the distance that one gets from leaving that place gives a different perspective. I suppose I do have a slightly different perspective. Because at the end of the day, folks knew that the shutdown was really about one thing. And I think this is where Democrats, particularly House Democrats, did a good job of clarifying what the question was, healthcare subsidies or no. Why that wasn't a winning message is something that is beyond me, and I'm continuing to be frustrated and a bit baffled by it because I think it's a lost opportunity, not just a political opportunity, but an opportunity to say, look, we're going to support Americans who need health care, and we know that everybody wins when that happens.
Well, part of the reason we wanted to talk to you was because you've spent some time now on the outside, seeing it with sort of fresh eyes. If you were to counsel Democrats right now, what would you tell them?
Well, it's my counsel would be simply that the American people can figure out what these issues are about when we speak with clarity. And I thought that had occurred. And just stick to it is my message. If it's a fight worth starting, it's a fight worth going all the way through for. And time again, we've been, I think, duped in a way into believing the promises that are being made to us in the midst of a negotiation, when time and time again, those promises are broken. I mean, I think back to even the budget deal that we made with Kevin McCarthy. It only took him a matter of a few months to renege on that agreement. And this has been over and over and over again. It's as predictable as can be. And we just need to get the message that we can't take them at their word. And we just need to hold the line and force a negotiation that results, in some kind of an outcome that won't be everything we want. Clearly, we weren't going to get everything. But in this particular case, it was one single priority that we meaning Democrats in Congress, were trying to address. One single priority. And they weren't able to hold the line for that. I mean, I've been through this. I remember when that one single priority was getting funding for the Flint water crisis. And Nancy Pelosi and Paul Ryan sent me into a room to negotiate the deal. That's the way it's supposed to work. They didn't want to do it, but they understood that in order to move forward, they're going to have to do something they don't want to do. We're going to have to accept some things that we don't like. But that's the way democracy is supposed to operate. Not one side holds out until the other one folds, but you sit down and negotiate.
Let's pull on that thread a little bit about one singular priority. There are some strategists, political pundits who are saying, no, actually, maybe this makes strategic sense for the Democrats, that you reopen the government so that the focus on flights being canceled, so the focus on 42 million Americans without SNAP benefits, those things get out of the headlines. And instead, in 40 days, all of the headlines will simply be on an up or down health care vote, and it puts the spotlight on Republicans. Do you buy that strategy?
No, I mean, I actually think that the initial strategy was the correct strategy. That is, you're not going to win everything. Look, I don't like what the Republicans are doing to the federal government, essentially breaking what has been a decades-long promise that, for example, with SNAP or even some of the other issues that we're seeing, these policy changes are serious and significant. But I also know where we stand in the minority in the House, in the minority in the Senate, president of the other party. They have complete control of everything. And so I think while in theory we could have had a strategy that is broader than this, I do think this is one of those times when you got to get something. Do what we can to preserve some semblance of the social contract that's been in place now for decades, and live to fight another day on those other questions.
We're speaking with retired Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee, trying to answer the question, what is happening with Democrats in D.C. right now and why?
Let's talk, I guess, about the intersection of policy and politics. Is part of the challenge during a shutdown for Democrats that Democrats just believe more in government services and the importance of government programs to help people?
Yeah, I think that is part of the basic frame here, is that we have been the party that believes that there are ways for government to advance justice, equity, inclusion through federal policy. This is not true of all Republicans, but there are enough Republicans now who actually see success in a shutdown, success in the failure of government, because it fulfills their prophecy that government is incapable of conducting on behalf of the public good. Of course, I don't believe that. Many Republicans don't either, but there are enough of them who believe that any display of government dysfunction, while it may have a terrible effect on the U.S. economy, on individuals, on families, because it fulfills their philosophical predisposition, they completely embrace it. So often that puts Democrats in a position where it's not sort of a symmetric battle here, in the sense that we're not fighting just over issues, but when we fight over something that we hold to be important, that we think government can do that benefits the American people, they win by doing nothing. We can't do that. It doesn't work for us to win by doing nothing. But those Republicans actually win by doing nothing, and they have become extraordinarily good at that.
What's going to change this dynamic, if anything?
Leadership, bottom line. At the end of it all of this comes down to leadership. And this is one of the reasons that I've been impressed and been a strong ally of Hakeem Jeffries, because he has held the line. In a difficult period, now we may see some defections when this vote comes to the floor. I get that. But to this point, they have been able to hold the line when it was important to do so. And I think that's an example others should follow. Leadership matters. And sometimes leadership means withstanding the pressure, even when it feels like it's too much to withstand, because you're fighting for a larger purpose.
Does Senator Chuck Schumer need to step down from leadership?
I'll let the Democrats in the Senate make that decision, but I don't think I would be being honest with you if I didn't say I was disappointed, and that this wasn't the first time that we've seen something like this happen, where we felt like, we had a principle we were going to stand on until we were able to get something, and then without getting anything other than this sort of false promise that we see of a future vote, they fold. That's not what the American people want us to do. When it comes to these principled battles, they want us to stick with it.
Finally, Congressman, what do you say to a Democratic voter or someone who is considering their future as a Democratic voter right now who is disappointed, who's angry?
The one thing I say for sure is, as I've said to many even office holders, the people are the party. I mean, be a part of it. Press for change, press for stronger leadership, but also don't take the position that because they might disagree tactically with the way Democrats are operating, and even while I may disagree tactically with, for example, the way Senate Democrats have operated in this particular moment, the difference between what we're fighting for and what the Republican agenda looks like for anybody who aligns with the principles of the Democratic Party, or I think even beyond that, it's night and day. So checking out, stepping away, saying because I disagree tactically means I'm not going to vote in my interest, is a mistake that has a consequence to it. And we are living that consequence right now.
Retired Michigan Democratic Congressman Dan Kildee, thanks for the insight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before we go, let's spend a couple minutes getting caught up on two court or court-adjacent cases this week that you've been closely following, Rick. One, President Donald Trump's pardoning this week of the so-called fake electors in Michigan. And two, the legal fight over Michigan's new wholesale marijuana tax. You filed on both, so reporter's choice. Which do you want to dig into first?
Let's start with pot.
Okay. So when we last left the case, members of the marijuana industry had sued the state over this new 24% wholesale tax on marijuana. We've had a number of conversations on the show about the tax and the legal challenges. We will post them on the website if you want to get up to speed. But basically, quickly, lawmakers, they voted to create this tax. The industry cried foul, saying it is unconstitutional for the legislature to do this because they didn't get a 3/4 supermajority vote to change a voter-enacted law.
That's the one that legalized the recreational marijuana industry in Michigan in the first place.
Right. Voters passed it in 2018. So the industry has sued. It is in court. And just this week, we got the state's response. Basically, the state's explanation for why they say it is constitutional to create this tax. You covered the filing, Rick. What does the state have to say?
It is technical. The state says this new tax does not amend the marijuana initiative. Again, that's the 2018 initiative that created a retail tax. And this tax is a wholesale tax. So they're arguing that this law does not regulate marijuana. The tax just happens to be on marijuana, but it's to generate revenue for roads. Also, that it fits into the state's constitutional responsibility to fund government.
Remind us what's at stake here.
Well, if the state loses, it blasts a big hole, an estimated $420 million in the state budget, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer's Fix the Damn Roads plan. If the marijuana industry loses and this tax goes into effect, they say businesses will close.
And the case, we should note, has been fast-tracked, that there's actually some idea that it can possibly get all worked out before the tax goes into effect.
Which is January 1st. Judge Seema Patel says the goal is to have enough time for it to go all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court if necessary, and that would be a very fast track.
Okay, so now in the time we still have left, let's turn quickly to the fake electors case in Michigan. This week, President Donald Trump preemptively pardoned a number of folks who were involved in allegedly trying to overturn the 2020 election results, and this included 16 Michigan Republicans.
This is the group who back in December of 2020 gathered in Lansing and signed fake certificates to cast the state's electoral votes for Donald Trump, who lost Michigan that year.
But this pardon is not the last word in this case.
These federal pardons inoculate the fake electors from federal charges, but not state charges. Now, in September, a judge in Michigan dismissed those charges against the fake electors. The judge said the Michigan Attorney General's office did not show intent to commit a crime.
But there could still be a state appeal to that ruling.
Yes, Dana Nessel, the state AG, a Democrat, says she is still deciding whether to appeal the judge's decision. The Attorney General said the judicial clock has not started yet toward the deadline to make that decision because her office is still waiting on transcripts from the earlier proceedings. So stay tuned as we wait to hear about that decision to appeal.
And we will bring you the updates to all of these stories and more every week straight into your inbox with the It's Just Politics newsletter. Sign up the website, michiganpublic.org. And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta.
Let's talk again next week.